Welcome to Cambridge AI. As I said, this is a new departure for us. It's a webinar, and I'm delighted to say that over half our sign-ups today are new to the event of Cambridge AI. We meet up every couple of months, and the focus is on case studies and demos. The subject of tonight's presentation is AI hallucination. A million people using ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini to answer questions, but according to research, 1 fact in 5 in the output of these tools is either mangled or completely made up. So tonight we're going to be hearing from 4 practitioners at the cutting edge of solving this problem. I'm Mark Rogers, and I work with GroundedAI. GroundedAI's business is in citation checking, so we have a very close interest in this. And indeed, Nick Morley, our Chief Product Officer, will be speaking later on. RedTech Recruitment, and Robert's just going to say a couple of words about RedTech Recruitment to get us underway. So Robert, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark, and good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon on this hot day. So for those who don't know me, I'm Rob, and I'm the co-founder of RedTech Recruitment, and I'm here with my co-founder, Rebecca, as well. So we are a specialist recruitment technology company, and we're proud to be one of the highest rated tech recruitment agencies in the UK, with a consistent 5-star reviews from both our clients and candidates. And I always like to take a minute at this point to share just what we're seeing in the market at the moment, mainly because as recruiters, we're in a very unique position to see the bigger picture across the technology sector. Right now, AI continues to dominate hiring conversations alongside machine learning, data, cloud, and cybersecurity. A lot of organizations are investing heavily in these areas because they recognize they can't afford to be left behind during this kind of next growth phase. And I think what is especially interesting is how these conversations have evolved. So, for example, 12 months ago, many organizations were asking us whether they should be kind of looking at AI and what the right strategy looked like. And, you know, only last week I was having conversations with some hiring managers, and it was shifting towards how they can recruit the right talent while implementing AI safely, responsibly, and at scale, which I think ties in perfectly to tonight's topic. So if you're hiring into your team and you're looking for your next opportunity, or simply want to continue this conversation after today's webinar, please do drop me or Rebecca or one of our colleagues a message, and we'll love to have a chat. So with that, I will hand you back to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Robert. And our first speaker tonight is Richard Sloggett. And Richard is a technical founder currently building Referonix AI, an AI-first solution for trustworthy proposal and bid generation. And by the way, if you have questions during any of these presentations, please use the chat function, and there will be 2 or 3 minutes at the end of every presentation for the presenter to answer some questions. So, Richard, if you wouldn't mind sharing and taking it from here.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. As Mark said, I'm Richard Sloggett, founder of Referonix, and I'm doing work looking at using AI safely for high stakes writing assignments like proposals. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is what hallucinations are from my perspective, why they matter, and what you can do about them, whatever tool you happen to use for your AI interactions. So rather than start with a cold definition of a hallucination, I'm going to start with an actual hallucination. So drawing on our recent work in this sector, we led delivery of a comparable healthcare transformation program in 2023, cutting average patient onboarding time by 40% across 3 NHS trusts. So it's confident, it's very specific, and it probably reads like every other line in the proposal. And in this case, it's a hallucination, a claim that is entirely plausible, but in this case is simply untrue. And for someone reading this hallucination, there's nothing on the page which would tell you which particular claim is the invented one. And this is fundamentally what makes hallucinations very, very dangerous. And it's not a typo or a crash, it's really the model fundamentally doing exactly what it was built to do. It's providing you with a response to the request that you made, but failing to establish a clear notion of what is an objective truth in providing that response. And the really dangerous variant of this kind of hallucination is perhaps something that's evolved more recently over the last year or so, is something that's very, very plausible and very competent prose, and maybe is a subtle stretch, not glaringly wrong, but filling in blanks or making assumptions, and hidden by the fluency of the response that the frontier models are now able to write with. So in many scenarios, and not all scenarios, but in many scenarios, the default approach to using AI is typically the model writes, you check. You ask the model to produce something for you, and then hopefully you do some checking on that response. And the checking part is the expensive but often skippable part. That's the first bit dropped under the deadline, and fluent prose generated directly by AI can be really hard to second guess. And the model hallucinates fundamentally when asked for something it's got no basis for. And in the one-step writing process where it's generated a response directly, the model really hasn't had an opportunity to tell you, I don't have the information to support this, so it reaches and hallucinates. And the extra what's missing step highlighted here can help make the model plan and surface the gap before it writes. So the framing I'm presenting here, I guess, is that a lot of what we call hallucination is effectively undergrounding, not providing the right context or sufficient context, and not giving the model the explicit opportunity to call out missing information in its knowledge. And the cheapest place to stop a fabrication is undeniably, I think, before you actually do the generation. So I'm going to propose 3 defenses to the problem of hallucination in this context. What can we practically do to mitigate this issue? And these, to stress, these are practices, not a product. These are practices that I'm suggesting, so can be used in ChatGPT or your other favorite chatbot with some discipline, not a product. So 3 lines of defense: grounding the context that you provide. So context meaning the documents or source information you provide when you make requests of the AI. Providing a human checkpoint, a key human checkpoint before you get to the point where it's generating that fluent prose, and making verification quick and easy. Again, practices to follow rather than a product. So the first defense, grounding, what does that look like in practice? Well, first observation is that a blank box invites the open world invention. If you ask an LLM a question and it's just got its internal knowledge, you're inviting stretch and fabrication from the get-go. So the upstream fix really is grounding your conversations and questions on the specific context that you want the LLM to answer using, compared to downstream cleanup, which can be quite expensive and complicated. So providing specific documents or evidence or data that you want the LLM to use is really key to that grounding piece. And the second piece really is making the model declare what's missing before it generates any actual any prose, and we'll come on to that in the next stage. So grounding as a prerequisite to asking the model to declare what it might be missing in terms of that context. So again, the cheapest place to catch a model going wrong is before that fluent prose exists. So introducing a specific checkpoint, a designed checkpoint that is a review stage where you agree with the AI what the plan is, where the evidence sits, as a discrete step before writing can be hugely valuable here. And the final layer of defense is making that verification step for the user quick and easy. And we know from the early experience with LLMs that users can skip this check quite easily when there's friction involved in the process. So make it quick and easy. Maybe identifying the riskiest passages if possible, making a claim check a single click operation if that's practical at all. Because you can bet that if the hunt to verify a claim involves looking through 40 pages of detailed, complex information, it's not going to happen at 11 p.m. when someone's under pressure to deliver some particular bit of context. So really making that streamlined and friction-free is a key part of making verification successful in your workflow. So I've built a tool, a platform really focused on helping draft consulting proposals and RFP responses. It's an early stage solution, so we've got a handful of pilot customers. I'm using that here as an example to make these kind of ideas concrete. So in Referonix, the first thing we do is we ask the user to provide any and all context for the proposal they have available, to interview transcripts, background documents, briefs, notes, that kind of thing. And then before any prose at all is generated, the tool checks the coverage against both the material that's provided for this particular proposal and the firm's own content libraries, and names what is thin. It hasn't made something up, it's told you there's fundamentally a gap. And this is exactly where our example invented healthcare claim from the first slide would never have been born. It wouldn't have crept in if these gap checks had existed really early in the process. And this step gives the user the opportunity to provide those additional context documents or data to fill the gaps, and also to recognize where there may be gaps where the LLM might need to stretch to provide the desired response. So that's recognized up front. And fundamentally, filling in these gaps and providing that proper grounding removes the incentive of the model to stretch or to fabricate, or at least limits the incentive to stretch or fabricate. So the second defense really is that one click from claim to source. So making verification really quick and really easy for the user. And in Referonix, every claim links back to its source, and that doesn't mean a document you've got to trawl through 40 pages of. That means one click to verify the paragraph or paragraphs or tables or images within the source context that you provided are identified. So verification is a really quick and easy process for the user. And I want to state the honest limit to what this actually does. There's a key nuance, I think, here. What we're identifying here through this verification citation mechanism is provenance. It's not necessarily correctness. So the user is able to quickly and easily understand the source context that contributed to what the model has generated, but it can't prove that it's actually fundamentally correct from that user's point of view. And the dangerous error, reflecting back on our original citation, dangerous error is often that subtle stretch. So what we're doing here is making this quick and easy for the human to catch. We're not guaranteeing correctness. We're providing a really quick and easy opportunity for the user to get confidence in the content that's been generated by the model. So technology here has been productionized in an adjacent problem space already, primary research, where we derive insights from transcripts and research documents. And in this setting, which is a high stakes scenario where every single claim has to be traced and verified before anyone could use it, really impactful if hallucinations make their way through in that scenario, we saw a 50% reduction in time end to end. The same core ideas as illustrated in the proposal development scenario, but in a previously adjacent problem space. So our focus today is firms that write proposals and respond to RFPs, but this key provenance idea will extend to other areas also. So just a quick bit of honesty at the end here. What this doesn't do is it doesn't provide reassurance of correctness. Citations prove provenance. They don't establish correctness. That's still down to the user to establish. And grounding reduces hallucination, but definitely does not remove it. Even grounded tools will get it wrong a fairly significant portion of the time. And none of this removes the requirement for the human in the loop. Fundamentally, it makes the errors easy to catch, but doesn't replace the human that's needed there to catch them. And finally, just to wrap up with 3 questions to ask, maybe whatever tool you use. Does it ground the context I gave in? Does it ground in context I gave it? Is it specific to the context and evidence I've asked it to look at? Can I check the plan before it writes? And can I verify a claim in one move? And if any of these you're answering no to, it's probably where your next hallucination is lurking. And maybe the habit to encourage most, make the model show you what is missing before it writes. Have that intermediate review step. I built Referonix to help firms use AI safely and responsibly. Still very much learning what works and doesn't effectively. Anyone wants to compare notes on after the session, I'd be really happy to have a follow-on conversation. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Damien Charlotin. Damien is a legal technologist and researcher associated with HEC Paris and Sciences Po Paris, where he works at the intersection of law, AI, and computational methods. So, Damien, it's all yours.
Oh, thanks a lot, Ali. Yep, good. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. And I guess because we're all experts or in the field of hallucination, I'll focus on my particular, what makes me a bit different, I guess, and that is that I'm focused on hallucination in the legal domain. And I think that in this particular domain, hallucinations are clearly an issue, also clearly something that will become normal and will have to be managed. And just as with the previous presentation, I'm working on ways to manage it. I've also built a site checker. I won't do a demo, but just so you know, I can also share my experience in the difficulties in that, and I fully agree with everything that has been discussed earlier by the previous speaker. I think we've had the same experience. But anyhow, discussing, as I mentioned, the particularities of hallucinations law. I'm interested in this subject because I've built a database of every time a lawyer or a party was found to misuse AI in a way that led to hallucinations. The database is online on my academic website. It's reached over 1,600 cases now, with most of them from the US, but growing at the rate of something like 5 or 6 cases a day. And to clarify, it's really only the cases where a court, a tribunal said, you clearly misused AI or did something with AI in this respect. And here's what we think about it. Most of what they think about it in terms of sanction so far, it's just a warning, because it's a bit, I guess it's a bit awkward from the part of the court to sanction people for what is, in most cases, a mistake. And especially since most of these cases come from self-represented litigants who might not be familiar with legal tools, legal pleadings, and don't have necessarily the financial means to shoulder a monetary fine. But as you can see on the screen here, sometimes you've got lawyers quote, and they can be fined monetarily, and or there are sometimes professional consequences in terms of we've got something like a couple of lawyers in the US who have already been disbarred in cases where hallucinations were an issue. And I'm spelling that out very precisely here. Usually what happens is that, and it's also why hallucination is a fascinating topic, it's to some extent a good thing in the legal field, because it allows to track down and to cast a spotlight on actors, individuals who have no business practicing the law, and say what we see that the worst offenders in the database, there are people who should not be practicing at all, and the fact that their briefs are full of hallucination is just as the last drop that finally sometimes allows judges to bring down the hammer on them and sanction them and make sure that they don't come back. But still, there's a part of it, which is that we see cases where hallucination is not merely a mistake, it's not merely a lack of awareness of large language models and AI tools, but sometimes it's just as a result of a system of a lot of pressure, monetary pressure, time pressure, a lot of work that is being disaggregated, where a lot of different people are working on the same memorial or brief or motion, and so responsibility is diluted, and down the line, somewhere in the pipeline, someone fails to check an AI output and you get an hallucination. And that's something that we see increasingly, and that's where we see the biggest stories, the ones that make headlines with big law firms, where you pay extremely dearly for an hour of your attorney's time, and then you find out they file hallucinations. What happens usually is really this kind of scenario of very complicated cases where the incentives were not there to check everything. But so when I teach about hallucination and when I intervene about hallucination, I always go around, but I probably don't have to explain the probabilistic nature of most large language models, and next token prediction, etc., and then the idea of a lack of grounding. I realize that I'm talking in front of together with people from GroundedAI, so I won't talk a lot about what lack of grounding is. When I teach my student, my best example, I think, is this study where you give people a data set to examine, and most people don't see that the data set actually, when you plot it on the most basic plot you can do, which is a scatter plot, shows a gorilla. But large language models don't see it either, because they lack the kind of grounding that allows someone to stop and say, hey, wait a minute. But I think it's a great example as well, because it's also true of most people. And every time I teach about that, my main underlying principle and message is compared to what? And compared to people, and especially compared to lawyers, AI is not great, but lawyers are not great to begin with. So at the end of the day, we'll have to find a way to make it work. But coming back to why hallucination or law are an issue in particular, it's because law and the legal work and the legal craft is grounded in the fact that you are relying on chains of authorities. My doctoral thesis a few years ago was on what makes an authority from a legal data analysis perspective, from a data science perspective, because in every legal field, when you make an argument based on something else. And that something else might be a law, it might be a norm, it might be a precedent. All this kind of authorities derives their validity and legitimacy from a particular chain of authority. So a law is a good law because it has been adopted and enacted by a legitimate source of political power. A case law is all right because it has been rendered by a judge properly appointed and not challenged by a judge of a higher jurisdiction, etc., etc. This chain of authority is being completely disrupted by large language models when they are hallucinating, which is what they always do. I mean, the way LLMs works, anything they say, in theory, is an hallucination. It just happens that most of these are coincide with facts and real things, but basically everything is an hallucination. But if you introduce such hallucination in the legal field, well, you run into a lot of possible issues. And so it's exactly what I was saying here in this meme, is that hallucination is the reverse of the fact that LLMs are also good at creating things. I mean, we praise that creativity of modern LLMs. We use it for a lot of different things, but the reverse of that creativity is the capacity to come up with a language that is not stilted, unlimited. That's what leads to hallucinations. I mean, there is also a lot of sociological aspect. We see plausible, good-looking text, and we don't second guess it. Another point about the hallucination in the law is that the legal field is perfect for hallucination. In particular, we know from the way large language models are trained that patterns are a great thing that for training large language models. They love to follow patterns. Legal citation has been well harmonized over the past few centuries for reason of access to justice, and it's a fascinating story in itself. But that harmonization is to some extent what now has led to the ease with which large language model hallucinate anything. A typical legal citation would be, for instance, a case law. It's always proper name versus other proper name, a bunch of letters and numbers, and bam, you've got a citation, and you can put anything in these categories that I just mentioned, and a lawyer, because there are so many case law authorities. Unless you check, you cannot be sure that it exists. And large language models are very capable of following these patterns that are creating hallucinated things, hallucinated authorities. But yeah, no, it's one thing I mentioned earlier is that, and another reason why law is ripe for hallucination is really the fact that the business practice of how law is being handled it's also fruitful for hallucination. And so, and that's again what I was mentioning earlier. Hallucination, in some respects, the issue we have is good for casting light on some issues that we had, but we were not aware we had. In particular, it's very common. It was very common, and it is still very common for lawyers to take on cases, file documents that they have delegated to other lawyers. So it's in any given field. You've got juniors who themselves delegate to their juniors, and then you got the interns, and then you got the paralegal. Anyway, the bottom line is that everyone is delegating downwards, and at the end of the day, it's still the head of the hierarchy who signs and puts his or her responsibility on any brief. And that used to be all right, because you could trust the people you were delegating downwards to. You didn't have to check. You could assume that they were good people from good schools being hired and doing good job. You cannot have this level of trust with large language models, at least when it comes to providing you with a grounded output. And so if you add this practice, which was extremely common, of not reading and trusting and delegating, to business parameters of you want things fast, you want things that look good, you want things that you're dealing with very complex cases where you got cost pressure, etc. Again, everything is done so that you have hallucination in this field. So yeah. Going further, one thing that I really want to stress is that hallucinations are not only in the legal field, are not only an issue of personal responsibility and of cases going wrong, etc. We've seen already a few judgments being overturned because judges either hallucinated themselves through misuse of AI tools, but also, and that's even more common, judges just recycling or reusing arguments from the parties, which themselves were full of hallucinations. And so if that happens, it's terrible in the context of a given case, but that's the context of a given case. But then the more broader issue is when it goes beyond the context of a given case, when hallucination enters the body of the law and are not caught before they can be relied upon to make new laws and new legal advice or whatever. Here on the slide, you've got an example of a KPMG tax flash news, which is some kind of legal guidance on fiscal issues. This flash news, which is still online, you can still read it, it still gives legal advice. All the legal advice is based on a Indian tax judgment, which was full of hallucinations. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about chain of authorities being broken. People down the line will rely on that tax advice, being unaware that the ultimate source for that tax advice is something that comes out of thin air, invented and hallucinated by an AI. That's what I call epistemic pollution. We got a few examples of this beyond that. Recently, for instance, in database, we had a case of an attorney not hallucinating per se. They did not use an AI tool, but they copied and pasted a brief that was publicly available in the main database. And that brief, created by someone else, was full of hallucinations. So the issue is still the same. So the attorney did not check what they should have checked, but you can see how it's a different scenario on which you are not at fault of misusing AI, but you're just, because you were trusting the data from this database, and suddenly you cannot trust it anymore because part of it is full of AI generated text. So
Damien, sorry, we're at time. So
we're at time. Oh, sorry, I could not see the clock or whatever. So I will just conclude by saying, and you can see I've got a lot of different slides, with the idea of epistemic hygiene, which is everyone, what we tell lawyers, what I tell lawyers when I teach about this, is that it's important to know what can be delegated, what cannot be delegated, what needs to be double checked, and always to treat a citation, especially citation as coming from an AI, with a grain of salt, and use site checkers such as mine, for instance, to help you with that. That's all for me.
Thank you, Damien. We have a couple of questions. How does the temperature affect the hallucination tendencies of the LLM? Would it be better to use a temperature of 1? And the other question is, given the risks of hallucinations with models at the minute, what does adoption of AI look like in these high-risk industries? So you don't have to address those, but Damien, if you have anything to say on that, yeah, let me know.
So temperature is something that has fallen out of favor in the past few months. A lot of API now does not, with the newest models based on reasoning settings, do not allow easily for you to set the temperature. Even though I mean that could help in some respect, but fiddling with the temperature was always a trade-off in terms of you still want some creativity. Temperature 0, as we know, ended up with very limited short sentences that didn't go very far, and so that was definitely not a silver bullet. And then this issue, what do they say about the adoption of this technology? Well, not a lot actually. It turns out every lawyer I know is using AI in some respect or not, and to some extent, or saying they're using AI, because there are other considerations at play in this market. There are considerations of for competition. You don't want to be the old one out, still using pen and paper. There are considerations of a lot of legal tech vendors coming and promising you that everything will be right and lying about it. There are considerations of peer pressure, of client pressure. We're starting to see a lot of pressure for clients saying, yeah, I don't want you to build that much for something that could be done by an AI. And so hallucination is definitely something that is on the back of their mind, but not something that is slowing adoption as far as I can see.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Damien. That was great. And talking about legal tech vendors, can I introduce William, who is from Luminance, and will be talking about how they approach this problem. William Booth-Clibborn is Principal Research Engineer at Luminance, where he leads multiple engineering teams in developing AI systems for legal using advances in LLMs and reinforcement learning. He holds an MPhil in data-intensive science from the University of Cambridge and a BSc in physics from the University of Exeter. William, take it away.
Thank you so much. That, I think, was a longer list of qualifications than I remembered I had. But welcome. So I hope you're not getting too stuffy this evening. I'm here to talk about the challenges of changing the legal industry. So here at Luminance, we're a business actually headquartered in London, with all of our engineering based out here in Cambridge, but we're an international business helping law firms and enterprise in completing their legal challenges. So we offer a product, which is our Luminance corporate product, and also our diligence product for both of those kinds of use cases. And I'm here to tell you that AI will go wrong. And it already has done for some people. This here is an article on Sullivan and Cromwell, who are a hotshot Wall Street law firm. And they submitted what these people are calling hallucinations in some of their reports. This is not the first time that we've heard about this, where you have senior lawyers reviewing it, where you've got policies in your business and somebody checked it, and yet all these errors still make it out. So I think it's an interesting question to ask, why did this system that they make allow this error to survive? Because we could blame it on the ghost that is hallucinations, but that is a single type of problem. LLMs can break in many ways, and as somebody who spends all of his day working with them, you become familiar with them after a while. So why did this system allow this to occur? I'm going to take you through a little example here quickly of the failure chain that you can come across that simulates this kind of a problem. I've made, I think, 6 particular OpenAI API errors in this, and if you're able to spot those, I've got something for you at the end. So our system, we're telling it, you are a legal AI assistant, and give us some confident answers with citations. Now our user reasonably asks, well, does clause 14 survive termination? Now our AI is going to go away, retrieve this tool, and it'll say, well, liability cap applies to each party. Liability cap usually survives termination, and here's some precedent to prove this. And now our AI reads this response from the tool, and it says, yes, yes, yes. Clause 14, yes, absolutely, survives termination, no problems. English law, all good, thumbs up from us. Now, this is not true. What you're seeing here is English law treats liability cases as continuing after termination unless excluded, is not true. That isn't what this tool has responded with. So it has made a bridge. And I think so it's made a bridge here. And I'm not seeing this as just a hallucination. I think there's something else going on. What I see is I see a retrieval error here. I'm being told about a conclusion from clause 14, but where is the whole clause? Where's the rest of the document? Where is the rest of this legal transaction? Is clause 14 amended later on? And the context error, that means that our LLM is returning information that is stale. This Acme V voice phone, let's say, confirmed liability caps, survived termination. That's one case, but that is not English case law. So our system is both not retrieving enough information and doesn't have and has stored off some incorrect information. Its context is poisoned. It doesn't check itself either. It just takes it as a given. Yes, go ahead. This is the correct answer, and there's nothing more to be found. This here is a validation error. We should have been able to catch this beforehand, but we haven't. And finally, we're relying on that user at the end to check this. They're going away, adding this to another note, and this then will become an error that lives within their system. And that final point there is my main concern. There is this hidden assumption in a lot of these legal tools that your human oversight at the end is a safety net. And the reason I don't think that makes sense is you're outsourcing frustration. Why am I making a tool where I'm saying, well, you're going to need to check this at the end because I'm not so sure myself? Humans become part of your product's accuracy system unless you are taking on that burden yourself. So how do we design for accuracy without this assumption of the human being there? I might add, it would be a bit like, as I'm making a product now, and I'm saying, you know, humans are our safety net. I'm not sending out a human with my product. You don't unfortunately buy me as a copy for your copy of Luminance. We haven't got quite as far as cloning yet. And that means that we need to be packaging this ready for a human to be using it right away. So one part that we start with is preventing the wrong answer in the first place. We've got a process of legal decomposition. We'll look at clause by clause, section by section. We'll contextualize this. As we discovered, contracts are meaningless in isolation. They can be amended. They can have a linked agreement. And if you ask a question about one of those documents, you're not going to get the right answer unless you know about the rest of them. So you need that link and that context to the other agreements that are relevant. And LLMs, as much as you'd like, are not perfect yet. There are certain gaps that need specialist systems, particularly numeracy or calculation. If I ask an LLM to multiply two numbers, it'll usually get that wrong up to a certain number of decimal places. But we can get them to just write code, and we execute it for them. And that lets them have access to a deterministic and symbolic way of doing calculation. And validation of these answers as well once they've been generated. So stop these plausible answers before they ever reach a lawyer. Interestingly, these types of context errors cascade. If you have one error early on, it interrupts more and more claims as your agent keeps running. And in a very basic plot here, after all of those degrees we were talking about at the beginning, I am still just making us some simple line plots. But you can see how this idea where you'd have a consistent accuracy until a single error is introduced, and then you cascade an error. So to resolve this, we've got quite a few products here. I think the main one I want to highlight is this resampling for hard questions. We've got multiple models generating an answer, having a verifier check them. All of this is building metadata for us to know whether a question is hard or not. If our auditor says not quite right, we can actually just retry the question several times and use that to know, is this a question that we're even going to be able to get a right answer for? So this is looking ahead. An interesting discovery we made too is if you use a different model to generate your answer than the one they used to check it, you get much better performance. So if I generated with OpenAI and checked with Gemini, way better, because you're not sharing those same inductive biases. And finally, I'd make a point on reliability. A lot of people don't realize this, but the LLM providers that we use are quite unreliable. So they can drop as low as 90% availability. And if I were to buy myself a coffee at work every day for 2 weeks, and just one of those days my coffee just simply didn't turn up, the money didn't go through, and I didn't receive it, but I had to wait that whole time still, I wouldn't go back to that coffee shop very often. But that is the stranglehold the cloud providers have us in. So a huge part of our work is taking away these infrastructure errors, abstracting them away, resolving them, so that they don't bubble up to become legal inaccuracy. As we were saying earlier, if there's a poisoned answer, a missing piece of information, let's say our answer didn't come back in time, we're not going to be able to answer accurately. So we spend a lot of time monitoring, repairing with some dynamic routing. I'll tell a particular story. The Google models quote a 1 million token context window. That is several, I think maybe 30 or so copies of all the Harry Potter books. However, we noticed that there was a completely different behavior above 196,000 tokens. Below them, far more reliable. Above them, don't even try. And a surprising number of these edge cases of exactly how a provider has decided to give you an LLM API and run their models, you can detect that in the benchmarks you run, and you often have to account for it to get to the 3 nines or 4 nines level of accuracy you usually need to provide software to these enterprises. So can we all agree? Let's bin off this old model of generating an answer, handing it to a lawyer, and asking them to catch the mistakes, and step into this new world where we build context before generation, validate these claims before concluding them, surface this uncertainty before we present it, and present that target evidence clearly so that it can be validated quickly. If
Thank you very much.
Just spot 6 API errors, our careers page is here, and we'd love to talk to you. And otherwise, here's a QR code for a demo of Luminance as well. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, William. That's great. I'm just looking down the list of questions, and we've got a few which are being answered. I think we probably will have to answer those in the chat because we're running a bit short of time. So just check out the questions in the chat. You can actually answer questions in the Q&A directly. So William, if you wouldn't mind just answering on that. And I will now hand over to Nick Morley, my colleague at GroundedAI. Nick is a product builder and data scientist. He's a co-founder and chief product officer of GroundedAI. And Nick's background is in neuroscience and machine learning. Nick, take it away.
Thanks, Mark. Great talks that I think tee up my subject very nicely. I'm going to start by saying that I think I agree mostly with everyone who spoke before me, but I'm going to zoom out a bit from the domain of law, though I will touch on it. I'm going to talk a bit broadly about the trends in hallucination and trying to get to the core more of where their current approaches are in terms of their ability to actually help us solve this for good. Talk about why some of those approaches may not actually be panning out. And I think that's going to propose a natural conclusion, a research direction, and that will include some of the work we're doing and take it from there. So I'm going to start by just explaining where we're coming from and our interest in the subject. So for those who don't know, on a day-to-day, we run the product called Veracity. It's a citation checking product. Our goal there is to help publishers, lawyers, judges, courts, verify citations in documents. So we're in usage by, for instance, the Institute of Physics, ICLR, who publish law reports in the UK. So we're in science and law solving this citation verification problem. And as you probably would guess, a lot of these venues or parties are inundated with inbound submissions containing hallucinations of all kinds and all kinds of severities. So it's really an interest of ours to understand, what is this failure case of generative AI? What's going to happen with it? Is it going to go away? That's what we want to understand. So just to give you an idea of what our tool looks like, if this is an output, We've identified all the citations in a document. We search for it. We make sure it's real, make sure it's relevant, and that helps, whether it be editors at journals or legal professionals, practitioners, identify hallucinations. We would call them errors. The hallucination assumes a provenance, I think, of generative AI. I think in many cases that is the right interpretation, but it's really a case of detecting errors, detecting deviation from what we can actually verify, right? So we published off the back of that with Nature magazine, a first large-scale study of the prevalence of fake citations and all their variations, right, of mismatches and Frankenstein citations. And that's been built on, there's now quite a well-established prevalence of these things in the published literature. But beyond that, we're users of the technology. So, as William said, not only are we trying to solve this for users, we're trying to solve this for ourselves. And I've got an example here, Exhibit A, right? So my co-founder, Conrad, who's on the call, we were trying to do some research about Google's latest models, and we used Google AI overviews powered by Gemini, and it gave us back a completely false answer based on its own documentation, on its own models. And I think that's a good starting point. I'm gonna keep going here, because it's not just our personal experiences and our day-to-day that's showing us this pattern is still here. It's also the research, which I think is really illuminating here. So if we start with a few studies here, 2023, the first wave of retrieval augmented generation search engines. So you have the likes of Perplexity, Bing Chat, UChat, and so on. And at that point, this study found that 25% around of the statements made by those search engines, even though they were associated with citations, those claims were not supported at all by the sources. And so, maybe retrieval augmented generation, RAG, it was early. The models have gotten better, the engineering's gotten better, and so on. So let's fast forward 2025. This is a landmark study. It was actually referenced in definitely Damien's and Richard's talks. This is the Stanford study showing that the LexisNexis and Westlaw tools, despite being grounded in real case law, actually still hallucinate a massive amount of the time. And there's all sorts of examples in their paper, and some examples we've already had, but you can go check those out. And okay, maybe the engineers at Westlaw and Lexis, look, there was still work to be done on this frontier. So let's come to 2026 now, a very fresh study from Leonardin et al. Using ChatGPT 5 Pro thinking with retrieval. They found when generating literature reviews in medicine, still crazy high fabrications. So William, I think, mentioned there are different degrees of hallucination, right? There's sort of minor errors and there's complete fabrications. But there were less than half of the claims made by these tools can actually be accurate or completely fabricated. And what's remarkable about these studies, these rates, is you can draw pretty much a straight line through them. Squint your eyes a bit, 25%, 17 to 33, and so on. I think this is pretty damning. Look, maybe the colleagues on the call building specialist systems in law probably are getting much, much better accuracy rates than this. But I think this is really damning. I think this suggests that we're plateauing pretty hard on RAG as a solution to this problem. So I want to dispel that first myth, I think, which is RAG is not all you need. And this is something actually William, I think, showed. I'll reiterate. The reason why RAG may not be all you need is there are several ways it can go wrong. So worth understanding those. Retrieval is actually quite hard. Getting the right context into the LLM, especially in very nuanced situations like law, that's not obvious. But let's say you can do that, you can get access to the private data you need, you can plumb that all into the LLM. That's great. But actually, you've got no guarantee that the LLM will actually use that citation, and maybe that's a usage failure or grounding failure, and that's something that it will exaggerate with context length, as you might imagine. You get lost in there, and William was talking about that as well. But then finally, and this is the most pernicious one, it's that fidelity or correctness failure. If it uses the citation, it has every chance of contorting, misrepresenting, those facts, and that's what the studies that and examples I've presented already show. So I think that's clear that RAG is not all we need. So what do we need? Verification is what we need. So William used the word validation. So I think we need ways to actually check the correctness and groundedness of LLM outputs, or just content in general. I think you can use the word fact checking for this. We need to detect errors. And this point, again, made by William, is I think this is a mindset shift here. You know, when we talk about accuracy of LLM outputs, it's natural to think in terms of 95%. You know, that's quite good. 99%, excellent. But reliability, when we actually want reliability, think about the services you use day to day that you rely on, like coffee or the internet, or, you know, you talk in terms of like 99.99999%, right? 5 nines or something like that. So this is where we need to be setting the bar for reliability and verification. And this is absolutely not a new idea. You look at what's been done in the past year or two with maths and code by frontier models, and it's driven a lot by actually advances in verification. So maths, very verifiable. You can proof check, you can use lean, it's gold standard for verification. Code, bit harder, but you can verify a lot of stuff. Is the syntax right? Does it compile? Does it pass some tests? And it's through this reinforcement learning on those verifiable rewards that we've been able to make the LLMs a lot better. And so clearly what we need, I think, is to unlock that same thing, but for knowledge. And that's where we're going to crack hallucination for things like legal and medicine and science in general. So when it comes to knowledge is fuzzy. And the knee-jerk reaction is to use an LLM to look at that knowledge, judge it. William said, use a different LLM. That's actually right. But I think that LLM as a judge is clearly flawed. I think the studies show that. So here we've got, I'm citing some studies here. One showing that while LLMs could be quite useful in terms of saying that an answer is correct, it was terrible at detecting errors. So it had that agreeableness bias that we know about LLMs, right? This is really low error detection rate. And why is that? Bias. I think that's core. It shows us how LLMs are super sensitive, right, to exactly how things are worded. Something appears in a different order, changes the outcome, changes the label an LLM would give it. LLMs prefer things which are longer. It will systematically rate those as higher quality and more accurate. Self-preference, this is the point William made. It will prefer output that looks more like its training distribution. I think it's not obvious that just using another LLM will solve the whole thing. But it will, you know, it will mitigate that, at least that small bias to some extent. There's a lot of overlap in the training data. So even if you can get the outcome, the LLM to give you the right verification output, what this other study has showed that if that LLM explanation that it gives as to why it shows that label can actually be completely separate from the reasoning chain it actually went through. And so the explanations, the reasoning chains, and the explanations LLM give about that are untrustworthy. And this should signal, this should be the final thing, signals that LLMs are clearly not the systems we need to verify information as reliable or not. And the final nail in the coffin there is get pretty compute heavy and inefficient to run everything back through the LLM. That's could 2x, 3x the compute cost. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is that you don't put the mouse in charge of the cheese, right? I think it's intuitive. You don't put the LLM, which is a hallucination engine, in charge of truth. I think that's quite clear to me. And so, and I think we've already got a good vision of where we need to be. With, like we've demonstrated in the industry with maths and code, is you want to accept the trade-offs of the different approaches, right? On the left, generative AI, let's accept a black box, non-deterministic, but super flexible genius, really good at generating candidate solutions. So that's what they should be. They should be candidate solutions. So on the right, I think we need to balance that with these, with ideally very explainable and reliable verification approaches. And they're typically, I think we're going to find those in more symbolic, more code-like approaches and less black box. So I think that gives us a very clear research direction here. I think we need to build optimized verification systems that are probably going to be pretty specialized. I think that's natural, because if we need it to be very reliable and very efficient, I think you've got to trade off scope. And I think we should focus on the subsets of knowledge that we can verify, or we can say something, we can have some guarantees about, and we can implement those. And so just another mention of our tool. This is, I think, a great example. The Veracity citation checker does adhere to those principles. We try and you'd be surprised at how much we're able to limit the use of large language models in these verification systems. There's a lot we can do with these approaches otherwise. And so our approach here is take an LLM output or just a document of any kind, be able to identify citations, search for them, figure out whether they exist and whether they say what's being claimed of them. So I think that's a good example. And you want to learn more about that, you can do, just reach out to us. And so, yeah, on a practical note, I think, to me, I'm a bit contrarian with regards to my colleagues on the call, perhaps. I think that a lot of the approaches like RAG and LLM as a judge and verification, I don't think they're fit to solve this problem, at least not alone. And I think that probably explains part of why we are plateauing really hard on this hallucination problem. I don't think it's going to go away. I think we'll solve it, but we have to focus on this verification step in order to solve it. So if you've got verification use cases on a day-to-day in legal, in particular, we'd love to start a conversation, and we'll share our progress. You can test our technology, and there's my email. So, Mark, back to you.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Well, we're almost hit time at the hour, so I'd just like to thank all the speakers for excellent presentations. And if you would like to know more about this, we will have a recording of the whole thing up on YouTube. And by all means, if you have any further questions, there have been some great questions in the Q&A. I mean, I'm happy to stick around for a couple more minutes and answer questions in the Q&A. I don't know if anyone else is, but for those who've got a hard stop at 6 o'clock, by all means, let's call it the end there. But if anybody else wants to hang around for another 5 or 10 minutes and explore any of the questions, that's fine by me. So there was a question actually from Marcus Toffanello. Am I right in thinking that studies like the Stanford example, hallucinations are akin to confabulating two things, e.g. that a direct quotation that is attributed to the quote is accurate in the sense of being said, just not in the cited case?
I don't think so. I think the Stanford study, I mean, that's one thing you can observe, right? You can observe this Frankenstein type pattern where that's what we call just, two things spliced together. But I don't think it might not be two things, it could be 10 things. I think you can think about it that way. After all, it's just spitting out basically something that kind of looks like a mangled version of its training data. So I think that might be anthropomorphizing it a bit. It's really just sort of it's an autocomplete, it's spitting out next words, and the result is sometimes something that looks like truth, and sometimes something that looks like falsehood.
Do any of our other speakers have any comments to make on that? Happy to unmute yourself and dive in. There was another question. Somebody saying it'd be interesting to learn more about how we can identify hallucinations. This was Paulo Vasconcelos. Would be interested to know how we can identify hallucinations in work or articles. I feel a lot of doubts when I'm wondering about a source or article from an expert which reads as if it's AI based, even with them denying. And this comes a little bit to the AI detection tools that are on the market. Nick, do you have any comments, or anyone else? Do you have any comments to add to that?
Well, let's not get started on AI detection tools, but
why not though? Why don't they work though?
Well, first of all, it's not solving the real problem you want to solve. I don't think. I think you want to do exactly what Paulo was saying. You want to identify you want to identify hallucinations. I think you want to verify the correctness of the work. I think LLM writing is here to stay. You can maybe detect it with some remaining accuracy. Those tools are really not going in a good direction, because LLMs can basically they'll be able to mimic my writing style. Like, what are you going to do? It's not really a solution to try and detect AI writing. I think the solution is in the information that's provided. But how do you identify hallucinations exactly? I mean, I think that's the open problem. Our solution is, well, we're focused on citations, so that's not a full answer. I think what's good about citations is they are actually something you can verify. You know, a lot of claims are quite ambiguous, but citations are something which you should be able to say this exists or it doesn't. There are certain things you can say for sure about citations. And so I think one of the biggest tells for me with AI generated content is, are the citations, you know, accurate and faithful? And I think you detect a lot of stuff like that.
Very good. Well,
There's a
thank you.
question to Richard and possibly William.
Okay, yeah,
If
thanks, Conrad.
they would suggest better prompts or other examples of how to tighten the recommendation for data coming into the LLMs.
Excellent question. We spend lots of time trying to improve prompts, and there is a limit. In fact, the best thing you can do is not write the prompts at all yourself. There's a fantastic line of research out of DeepMind from FunSearch and AlphaEvolve, which are two sets of papers, and they're using generative systems to write code. And by doing this, they just generated more code, ran it, gave itself feedback, and kept improving. It was able to make new discoveries in computer science. The reality is that there is a limit of how much you can prompt before you need to start looking at a systems approach. And as soon as you have a systems approach, then you run into a limit before you start needing a data access or you need data access solution. So my advice would be that prompting can get you so far, and then you start building more and more structure around your base model. Now, the likelihood is that the large LLM providers will start building this into their APIs fairly soon. So there's already web search in some of them as well. So it could be that you might not need to do any of this yourself, and it can be handled. But to keep ahead and provide the best possible product, we keep building these systems around these models to try and keep running ahead of the foundation labs.
And Richard, do you have any comments on that?
I think I'll maybe just go back to the original thinking, which is if you ask the LLM to challenge itself about the context that you've given it and the objective you're trying to achieve through a given response first, before you go ahead and generate a prose, you get that opportunity maybe to identify the gaps early on, as opposed to leading that to a verification exercise that comes after the generation stage. I think it's a really simple and practical thing to do. Really easy to turn into a prompt. You know, instead of asking it to generate X, Y, Z, ask it to come up with a plan to generate X, Y, Z, identify the evidence it's got, critically analyze whether there are any gaps there in the evidence it's got, and what it's going to use as its sources first, and then execute that plan subsequently once you're confident it's got the right context. So I think that's a really easy thing to turn into a prompting approach.
Very good. Thank you so much. And Conrad, any other questions that you spotted?
There was one question for Damien, which unfortunately Damien had to step away. But I can sort of paraphrase what he was talking about, which is the poisoning of the well. And you guys can also chime in, because I think everyone here kind of understands that problem. But the biggest challenge is referencing, I think William mentioned it too, cases that already had hallucinations in them unknowingly. And so then what happens is that you start building up your own, let's say, chain of thought in the model that is already built on propagated error. And so that just introduces more and more error. And so then you get this quite heavy problem, especially if you have then a database, I think, of documents that you rely on. And if those documents start containing hallucinations, then you're in a really bad spot.
Yeah, I'd add to that what we build is a graph of attribution, going all the way from primary documents and moving upwards to a final answer. So whenever you give a certain answer, you can still trace back through every decision all the way right back to a source, to the original source itself. But and this is actually one of the biggest risks one of the biggest risks in this industry is that everybody is building platforms to do work on. And at the moment, a lot of people do their work on Word. And that, I think, you'll probably start seeing that change a little bit more, because, as you're saying, we can't then build that graph of accountability on something that wasn't made in Luminance already, or at least we get better data when we understand how something was built. So probably watch the space for some word processors to appear in your browser very soon.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else, Conrad, on the bottom of the stack that you think we should look at?
There's quite a lot, but I think we've answered most of these questions. With some about air gap systems, which I think would actually contribute even more to hallucinations, because then the model would not be able to access anything. So if you happen to query it for things that are outside of that air gap system, it will tend to hallucinate more.
Well, thank you so much, everyone who came, and those of you who stuck around to hear those questions. Thank you to our presenters for staying around to answer those follow-up questions. And we'll look forward, I hope, to doing this again on another topic very soon. I've enjoyed it a lot, and these are great presentations. So thank you on behalf of all of our audience who are muted, and so they can't applaud, but applause for our presenters. And thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye for now. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.